Today, we bring you the second part of our two-part special series, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path. Today's episode will focus on culture. Our panel includes linguists, an artistic director, and scholars. Together, we uncover how China's culture, be it the characters, the music, the cuisine, the art, and more, represent a repository of China's history and an integral part of what modern China brings to the world.
What role does a nation's cultural heritage have in its modern development? What lessons can we learn from how civilizations and cultures interacted through the ages?
They have a diverse societies, multi-ethnic and multi-confessional societies.
It's our field. We have to play with this and to show how it all is interconnected.
Can ancient wisdom resolve today's challenges?
China has shown over centuries its ability to adapt, but continuity requires a very wide variety of various adaptations.
What are the characteristics of Chinese culture?
But amazingly is that I feel I belong to China and there's no distance.
Because I was curious about China's culture and I was curious about China's perspective on the world.
And welcome to CGTN special program.
Tune in to our special program, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path.
You're watching CGTN special program, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path. I'm your host, Tian Wei. Earlier, we talked about the Chinese civilization. What are the characteristics of this civilization? And now let's focus more on the cultural elements. Once again, we have panelists from all over the world joining us, both online and in person in our studio. I would love to go to Mr. Moser. Professor Moser, you've been teaching in China for decades, but many of your friends do not even know that you are a linguist. And actually, your sole research has been about Chinese characters. Why is it so important for you, even research about that decades ago?
Well, I think the first attraction I had for Chinese culture was the characters, before I even knew anything about the language. I was fascinated by them. I wondered how these characters had meaning. And I would go into Chinese restaurants and ask the waiter, how do you say this character? And usually they couldn't believe I was studying it. They would say, oh, that's a Chinese word. I said, I know it's a Chinese word. I want you to tell me what it says, right? From there, I started, getting interested in the characters. I bought some books on how to write them. And then I began to say, maybe I should learn to speak these characters and understand a little bit more about them. And when I did, I found out that basically the Chinese characters are an amazing repository of semiotic information about the Chinese culture. So from the Jiaguwen, the oracle bones, up to the present time, you can see the evolution of the society, the evolution of governance, of the dynastic period. Wow. All within the characters, on each character style, you can see where it came from and what dynasty it's from. And also all of the Chinese, the material culture, the agricultural culture, the moral culture, the philosophical culture are all there in the signs, because Chinese is basically from the beginning a pictorial script. And so the more I studied them, the more I just fell in love with them. And once I was sucked into the Chinese culture through the Chinese characters, then I began to speak Chinese.
You've been writing quite a number of books about them as well. Let's take a look at some of the photos here.
I invented a kind of calligraphy that was called bilingual Chinese character calligraphy. So if you look from the top right and go down, it says 中国. But if you start from the
Chinese
left,
characters.
you got CHINA.
Oh,
You go there, right?
You could read, yeah.
But for me, it was interesting to just kind of mix the characters. I love the mixing of East and West.
And not only that, you're wearing Chinese characters on your tie.
True. Yeah, right, exactly, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so the Chinese characters, I think, are, it's also good as a discipline because you have to learn, it's very much different from learning an alphabetic language. And so if you look at, they have these publications of Chinese literary texts like Confucius or Tang poetry. And if you look at these, what's called 对照, a different edition, where there's Chinese on the left side and the English translation on the right side, the difference is always like a ratio of 3 to 1. So this many Chinese characters, when you translate it into English, becomes that long, which means that there's some amazing thing about the Chinese characters. There's so much semantic information packaged into one little character.
Right.
And even nowadays, when I speak Chinese, I realize there are things I can say in Chinese with such concision that would take a long sentence in English. Like I'm at a buffet, and should I eat this food? It's all for free, you know? And they say, 不吃白不吃. I said, wow, how would I translate that into English? Right? Like, well, if you don't, you might as well eat it because it's free, so just go ahead and eat it, right? There's no way to make it any shorter in English. I love that about Chinese.
You struggle with that sentence a lot?
No, I just ate.
Right, or a simple translation, just ate.
Yeah. Eat it, go ahead, right, yeah. So anyway, it's a long struggle. It's very difficult, but there's nothing more fun and more, edifying than to do the Chinese.
So that's your entry point,
That's
the
my entry
Chinese characters, from curiosity, personal curiosity, to scholarship.
To obsession.
That's more accurate to describe it. What about for you, Claudia? What is your entry point about Chinese culture?
Actually, I would like to share with you about one of my not quite recent, piano concerto, Dream of the Red Chamber. I grew up in Malaysia, but I went to Vienna to study, as a piano performance. And when I had chance to play with Florian Symphony Orchestra, I remember I was asked to play a Chinese piano concerto. So I was looking at my repertoire, record, what could I play, So apart from Yellow River, the most famous, piano concerto, what else can I play?
And it's very masculine, by the way.
And
the Yellow River concerto.
I had problem rehearsing with the orchestra because they couldn't get the speed. 风在后妈在 I said, can you go faster, faster, faster? So they never get, to Western, Western musicians, they think that Chinese could play very fast, they speak very fast, they do things very fast. So it came up with me that maybe I should try to write a piano concerto that can show the beauty, of our ancient culture and of our history. The only channels that I can study about China or Chinese music is through reading, because we can get some, buy some Chinese books, from mainland China and also from Hong Kong, from Taiwan. And the other way of knowing about Chinese culture is through watching TV series from Singapore. And my childhood, there's a rooftop that we had this antenna, and my mom always warned me, hey, you have to turn off the TV when there's when it's about to rain. There's light at a storm. Okay, so I was watching Dream of the Red Chamber. That 87. It was filmed in 1987.
edition, the most
so
classic.
I love the way Lin Daiyu, when she spoke, it was extremely slow and soft and sentimental. So that was something that, this is the real Chinese. So she looks different from the Malaysian Chinese. So from there, and then I try to figure out what is the main I never understand, even now, So that is my part, when I was a child, and grew up in Malaysia, and I had a chance to move to China, in 2000. I had my piano recital in Beijing, 1999.
Wow.
So
maybe some excerpts of the piano concerto I would love to listen to, because I don't know how to translate that huge classic into music notes.
Well, it is very, very interesting how you interpret a Chinese music on a Western instruments, which is piano. So I can actually kind of sing a little bit.
That would be lovely.
Yeah. This is from the third movement.
All right.
Oh, very beautiful.
Even
And-
just the one aria, I'm already feeling
I know.
it. I'm already feeling it.
Yes, yes. And this movement, the title of this movement is called Dream in Vanity. I had it play first time in Malaysia, in my hometown. So there is one critics came up to me and, she was asking me, I really don't know much about Dream of the Red Chamber, but through your music, I could sense something, and there's a love story. There are love stories happening within this building, Dream of the Red Chamber. So, and also they could see the different characters. So it is very difficult to squeeze, like such a reach. We have over 40 major characters, and how can you interpret within, such a short, I would say, 30 minutes of
Concerto.
music composition? It is almost impossible. So I try to highlight, to concentrate and to really express in different tempo and also emotion.
Right.
So I have different four, movements. The first one is called Fairy in Sorrow, that represents Ling Dai Yu. And second, Love Ode, because Dream of the Red Chamber is all about love. And third one, which I just sung, Dream in Vanity. And fourth, The Beauties Ballad. So it's about the 12 beauties from
Wow,
the
just
Jing.
listening to the titles of these four movements, shall I
Yes.
say, already
Yes.
very melancholy and very Chinese culture bringing up. Look at these photos on the screen.
Well, I would like to highlight this one. This is in 2019. I got the privilege to be invited to attend the wonderful ceremony of the 70th anniversary. And actually, I was kind of down because I just lost my father. But, when I saw this and I heard the biggest choir of the world, everybody is singing in unity. 没有共产党就没有新中国. That really encouraged me. So it was such a success.
Your entry point is
Yeah.
the music.
It is.
Not only
Definitely.
the music, listening to it, but also
Yeah.
creating it
Yes.
and combining what you learned together as a child
That's true.
while watching that 1987 version of The Dream of Red
That's
Chamber.
right. That's right.
Beautiful story, I think.
Thank you.
Beautiful story. And by the way, I know your daughters are sitting here with you in the audience.
Yes.
They are the twins over there.
I'm
I know
proud
they are
of them.
also doing cultural exchanges. Huh?
Yes, they are. They grew up in, but actually they grew up in China. Yeah, they
Yes,
had their
indeed. So
education.
there is a family legend of being the
Yes, same
communicator
as-
of culture.
same as
Beautiful
David.
over there. Yes. Let me go to you,
Yeah.
Zoon,
Yes.
from Pakistan. What is your entry point to the Chinese culture?
I think, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, I was in 2014 deeply interested in Chinese foreign policy. And my idea was all Guoji Guanxi, international relations, multilateralism, South-South. I mean, it would sound so boring in front of a pianist and also a linguist. But gradually, and not even that gradually, in the first 2 years, 3 years, I started realizing so much of China's development, so much of what China perceives of the world, so much of the Ida Ilu. I mean, all of those things that I was trying to make sense of, those are embedded in Chinese culture. So my entry point was really social sciences, international relations. But increasingly, I mean, I find myself in situations, for example, this is from Lhasa, by the way, Tibet, or in parts of Yunnan or Sichuan. I mean, I've traveled so many provinces in China from the perspective of understanding China's domestic development, how multifaceted it is, poverty alleviation, all of that, all of these ideas in practice. But I realized that the Chinese culture, its diversity, the ability of people to be able to understand their history, it gives ordinary people also so much perspective, is deeply interlinked with Chinese Guoji Guanxi. And I was part of this delegation called the Global Young Leaders Dialogue. We were here to understand China's development and we were a very diverse group. One of the things that blew me away was that the map, I mean, in that entire museum, our guide constantly kept referring to how diverse China was, how diverse population-wise, culturally, those capitals, Chinese capitals, were in history where China saw, the civilization saw their peak. So for example, they were quoting like 2,000 years ago, the capital of that dynasty, I mean, 10% of their population was from overseas. And there was an entire map of the interaction with, you know, from China to East Asia, South Asia, all the way to the African continent and beyond in Europe. And these artifacts from that period, with Arabic, with other languages, I mean, ancient languages were part of the history of China. And they were right there. And what the guide was telling us, and all the others visiting that museum, was how important diversity, inclusivity was for that experience. And I think, I mean, I will add that I feel history, you know, it empowers us, it inspires us, but it also, you know, makes us humble. It has a way
They were there.
They were there.
Yes.
I mean, look at Sanxingdui Museum. What was that?
Sichuan province.
Right, in Sichuan province as well. There's so many examples. So history is humbling and it is inspiring.
Right.
And I think when we think of extraordinary developments coming from China and also, you know, its impact, I feel like it's important to realize that diversity is a historic concept and it is possible today. It's being aspired towards.
Beautiful story out there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hua, I want to know your entry point to our own culture by looking at other cultures around.
My personal opinion and my perspective is from, I would like to share with you, is from my most recent trip to Uzbekistan, where I had the opportunity to visit the very ancient Silk Road city, Samarkand. And there was this National History Museum, and one of the most treasures is the painting, the war painting relics depicting the Tang Dynasty, especially the women Emperor Wu Zetian and his husband, the Emperor Tang Gaozong. And it was depicting the theme of the relic painting is about how Wu Zetian and his husband Tang Gaozong celebrating the Dragon Boat Festival, but in the inhabitants in the Suteren at that time in their imagination. So unlike in our history, Wu Zetian is wearing a very unique costume, maybe probably the costume from at that time from Central Asian countries or regions. So this is a very vivid example of how people at that time appreciate Chinese culture but use their own imagination to depict their imagination of our culture and vice versa.
That's also a very interesting point you brought over there. I also wonder about President Turk, your entry point to the Chinese culture.
Well, you know, there are simple things and complicated things. Simple things from the European perspective are Chinese cuisine. I mean, you know, Chinese cuisine is a global cuisine nowadays. And
I think we all agree with that, President Turk. If every one of you agree, then we give him a warm round of applause.
Sure. But then again, you know, as one learns fragments, pieces of an extremely large puzzle. So, for example, when I was 7, 8 years old, my mother bought me a book of Chinese fairy tales, translated into Slovenian language. So I was reading those fairy tales, and my mother was discussing this with me, and I learned a great deal about floods in China. I mean, and what kind of situations happened as a result of floods. You know, that's part of the Chinese literary tradition, which really pays attention to things which we outside China don't really know much about. And then I was reading a book by Lu Xun, the famous writer of early 20th century, with his critique of social situation in China just towards the ending of the empire, and you know, this whole transition and so forth, which is not very political really, but talks about ordinary people. It talks, for example, about, I think, his brother or his cousin who was a fisherman, and the strain that fishing brought to his physical well-being and all that. So one learns another fragment, a small piece of Chinese culture. Of course, I know that Lu Xun is a very important figure, but I didn't read it as a representative of Chinese culture. What I did read was a story.
Yeah.
And there are billions of stories there. And I think we outside China learn about the Chinese culture through stories. And those stories can be told, obviously, in written literature, they can be told through music, they can be told through performances, cinema, and in other ways. So I think we have to, in the future, really understand the richness that exists and the billions of stories which have not yet been told.
Right.
And those stories have to be told to the West in ways which will be accessible to as many people as possible. I just told you a little bit about my own life experience, which is nothing special, but there are many other experiences of this kind.
It's beautiful sharing of experience you just did, sir. I think it's going to be very inspiring as we are trying to make sure that more people will understand China's stories and the real, authentic Chinese stories. Professor Dittmanson, what about your entry point to Chinese culture?
Well, my entry point to Chinese culture is a little bit complicated. I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, and grew up in Taiwan speaking a mixture of Mandarin and English and Minanyu, the Fujian dialect. So much so that when I went back to America when I was 8 years old, I had to concentrate on which words I could use. Could I say soy sauce or could I say jiangyou? Things like this. And my parents also grew up my father was born in Hunan and my mother grew up in Beijing and Tianjin. So we have a long family history, but at different times I've moved away from China and moved back and rediscovered it. And one of the things, as I was thinking about your question, one of the things that I rediscovered, President Turk referred to China's famous cuisine, which I, of course, love. I'm not an expert on Chinese cuisine, but I love it. But what I've thought about is behind Chinese cuisine is something else. It's a culture of being a host and of paying close attention to your guest, taking care of the people that you invite to a meal, and rediscovering that on my return. You know, in America has wonderful culture as well, but when you go out to eat, it's very casual and each person pays attention to themselves and makes their stomach full. But in China, a host will devote all of their attention to making sure each person at the table eats well, eats happily. And I'm reminded of the Chinese anthropologist at Cambridge University, Adam Chow, once talked about how the basis of almost all of Chinese ritual, or one important basis, is the relationship between the host and the guest. And that interplay, a sort of a ritual between the two. And I find that in my time in China, that has left a deeper and deeper impression on me.
I think I've been finding tremendous amount of wonderful topics of Chinese culture that we all need to dig into for the future from what you said. But I'm sure our audience also have their questions and their curiosities about what's being discussed and more. If you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, we have this lady, please.
I'm from Kurdistan region in Iraq and currently studying in Tsinghua in School of Public Policy and Management. As we know, the civilization of Chinese gave birth to several philosophy, which is Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. And it has a real impact on the government and ethics, like in general in China. But what I'm more curious or wondering, what's the impact or the influence on the neighboring countries and beyond? Thank you.
Maybe a professor did mention, he's a history professor, could also touch upon that question very briefly, sir.
In China, they developed a civil service examination system many centuries ago, and that system had an impact on the neighboring countries of Korea and Vietnam.
We have been discussing so many elements in the Chinese culture and civilization that fascinate our audience and our panelists from different parts of the world. Music, movies, literature, characters, linguisticism, China's development, and the list goes on. I guess every one of those areas can be one entry point for you and for all of us to take a deeper look at Chinese culture and Chinese civilization. But that is only the beginning. I know there's a long journey ahead, but I know I have the company of you. So before we go, let's go to the last and very brief round to all our panelists today. I want to know, in one sentence, what is your biggest takeaway from today's conversation?
It's about knowledge, about the shared values, and about experiences we share together, so which lead to a great imagination down the road.
We need to get everyone at the same place, in the same room, talking, living together, and all the problems will fall into place. And today is a good example of that.
Claudia.
We need to meet again. That is my sentence.
We can achieve anything, and our diversity becomes our strength.
The power of music that Claudia was talking about, that was really fascinating, and I would like to learn more about the musical aspect of inter-civilizational dialogue for the future.
Thank you.
The preservation of Chinese culture and the internationalization and globalization of Chinese culture are two sides of the same coin and go together.
Thank you. When I talk to all of you and hear your versions of Chinese culture and civilization, I have goosebumps because I think every story you tell is absolutely beautiful and it's from the bottom of your heart. And I appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. And with that, we are coming to the end of our special program on CGTN, Civilization and Imagination, a glimpse of China's path. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On behalf of my team, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.